open up the PowerPoint, and it's the one that I saved onto the flash drive, and then it's not found. So then it takes me a minute to get to it. Happy Easter, everybody. So I was really bummed 2 years ago when Easter rolled around and I was sitting in my dining room on the computer. Boy, that was a bummer. You agree? Go ahead and move it up one. Actually, move it up two. I'll talk to you a little bit about time, and then I'm going to talk to you about the empty grave. The title is, What Time Is It? Let me catch up here. In Ecclesiastes, it says, for everything there's a season, a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die. That's Christmas and Easter. And a time for new birth after that, afterlife. You know, in the old days, and when I say the old days, I'm talking, say, around 1820 in the United States of America. It might be 11:05 in Canandaigua, but it might be 11:20 in Buffalo. Because there was no way to coordinate. And it wasn't until really the railroad came through that there was a necessity for standard time. And so in each rail station there was a regulator clock, and they were very precise. And so the trains needed to leave at 11:05 and they needed to arrive at 3:02. And so there became a standard time, and so people who could afford a watch in those days would go down to the rail station and set their watch by the regulator clock. And we became people of time. And so now we can start our service at precisely 10:30. And we can get out precisely between 11:30 and 12. So in the old days, and when I say the old days in this sentence, I'm talking about before Christ, we see that people told the time based on a sundial. And they could tell what time it was, basically what time it was, by the position of the sun in the sky. And so theoretically at high noon there's no shadow on the sundial, and then as the afternoon comes around, the shadow moves around the sundial. And that's how they kept time in the time of Isaiah, because Isaiah talks about the sundial and the miracle that happened on the sundial. If you don't know what that is, look it up. You can find out. It's beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. So there's a time for everything. So what time is it? Next slide, please. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. Now we have somebody decided, some bright person decided, okay, instead of having night occur before day, we will have day change at midnight, which theoretically is the direct opposite of high noon. Now we live in a place where the earth tilts, and so we have much longer days in the summer and much shorter days in the winter. And on the other end of the calendar, there's just as much darkness as there is light in the summer, because the earth turns and summer and winter occur. On the equator, it's the same. The days are exactly 12 hours long, and the nights are exactly 12 hours long. And so at the equator, because there's no tilt of the earth at that point, the days are the same. Now, Israel is much closer to the equator than we are. So their days they're longer in the summer, but they're they're not as long as our days. And I first noticed this when I went to Florida to Bible school. That I noticed that the time was different. We had longer light in the summer and in the spring than they did. And the land of the midnight sun, you go to the North Pole, it's light out 24/7. And if you go to the South Pole, it's dark out 24/7. So God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and morning were the first day. So we see here that the reckoning of the Jewish thought about days are the day starts at evening and goes to evening. Now they say that Jesus was in the tomb 3 days and 3 nights. Well, that means that the crucifixion of Jesus did not happen on Friday. How did we come up with a Good Friday service? We came up with a Good Friday service because there's a passage that says it was the night before the Sabbath, and somebody thought, okay, well, it was the night before Saturday. But what it really was is the night before the Passover, which is also a Sabbath in the Jewish way of thinking. And so if you add 3 days and 3 nights, then you have to go back to somewhere around Wednesday. But there's a problem because, they didn't have a bulova. They didn't have a precise calendar. Their calendar was way different from our calendar in that it was based on lunar months. And so each month had 28 days, and then after a while, after 6 years, they just added an extra month, which moved everything back. And that's why Passover comes at different times between March and April. So Passover is on the 15th of Nisan. And Easter is the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. Now, who decided that? Now, this year they coincide. Orthodox Easter is today, and Passover was Friday night, and so they coincide because the Jewish month moves around like this, and then we have our extra day every 4 years because we have a solar calendar. They had a lunar calendar. So we're talking about time, and it makes it difficult to come down to place a timeline in our way of thinking when you talk about Holy Week. So understand this as a basic Jewish day begins in the evening. It doesn't begin at midnight, and the evening is technically 9 o'clock. Now let's look at this from a biblical perspective. Next slide, please. Here it shows the day from a biblical perspective. Jesus said, "Keep awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening, at midnight, at cockcrow, or at dawn." So we have in the evening is 9 p.m. in our way of thinking. Midnight is midnight. Cockcrow is 3. And this is why Jesus said to Peter, "Before the cock crows twice, you will deny me." Before 3 o'clock in the morning is what he was saying, because during the holidays, they had even all year long, they had trumpets that would blow at 9, at midnight, at 3, and at 6. And at the 6 o'clock one is the one that you got up and went to work, and worked for 12 hours. And so here's the understanding of night. And then in the story where somebody goes out and hires workers, the guy goes out at the 3rd hour, which is 9 o'clock, because the first hour is 6. He saw others in the marketplace. He went out at the 6th hour, which is noon, and the 9th hour, which is 3. And about the 11th hour, which is 5, he found others to go to work. So the day was divided between, it started in the evening and then went to the next evening. So in the first century, if a person were to say Jesus was in the tomb 3 days and 3 nights, they would say this instead: Jesus was in the tomb 3 nights and 3 days, because that's the way they understood it. Does everybody get that before we go on? Okay. Note to the projectionist. Next slide, please. Note to the projectionist. Leave the next slide up for the duration of what I have to say about it, okay? Because You're going to need to look at it, and the people that are watching online are going to need to look at it. Okay. Can you read it? The Wycliffe Bible. Well, who was John Wycliffe? John Wycliffe was a Catholic priest who decided on his own, without authorization, that people should be able to read the Bible in English. But the problem with English in those days is that it was Middle English, and it's like trying to read Shakespeare or Beowulf. Did you ever try to read Beowulf? I think Beowulf is actually in Old English, but this is Middle English. And so here's the translation of the Wycliffe Bible. But in the eventide of Sabbath beginneth to shine in the first day of the woke.
Totally woke.
Woke is a good thing in this context. So this is how the original Bible that was translated into English translated this verse. Now the reason I'm going through this, you'll see, I hope you'll see as we get through. So the Pope was mad at Wycliffe after he died, and so I think it was about 40 years after he died, the Pope ordered that his body be exhumed from the ground, and he was ground into dust and burned in the fire and thrown in the river. I don't know, you can't really do something to anybody after they're dead, but that's what they did to Wycliffe. Did you ever hear the Wycliffe Bible translators? I mean, they're translating the Bible into all languages. Then, that was 1395 that Bible was finished. And then in 1526, Tyndale decided to translate the Bible because the language had changed again. Now, the Wycliffe Bible was translated out of Latin into English. So Tyndale's Bible was the first Bible that was translated out of Greek and Hebrew into English. And they burned him at the stake. Because when you read the Bible, you can see when the church is doing things that are not biblical. And they killed him and burned him. They killed him by burning him at the stake. This is his translation. The Sabbath day at even, which dawneth to the morrow, or the morrow, after the Sabbath. That's how it's translated. English. That became not the way people spoke. So the King James Version, do any of you use the King James Version? God bless you. I had a King James Version. When I first was a Christian, it was a Thompson Chain Reference, and I liked the fact that you could look up all kinds of cool stuff in the back. And so I liked it for that. But once I found the New American Standard Bible, I never went back. It's still on my shelf over there. But the King James Version that everybody says, I have the King James Version, they don't actually have the King James Version. This is how the 1611 King James Version says, in the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn towards the first day of the week. Notice how all the spelling is different. No one really uses this. You can get it online. Maybe there's some diehard people out there that are King James only, but this particular version is not really used much. And the King James Version that we use is a newer version, quite a bit newer, in fact. Note to projectionists, leave the next slide up for the duration. Go ahead. Here's the King James Version as we know it. In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, and you'll see that day is in italics, which means, in a good translation, it means that the translator has provided that word. It's not in the Greek. So we see here that it says, in the end of the Sabbath. It doesn't say, on the first day of the week. And I can remember I can remember being shocked by this because it's not the tradition of the church that Jesus should be resurrected on Saturday evening. It's a tradition of the church that he was crucified on Friday, but mathematics tells us that that can't possibly be so. And the tradition is that it's Easter sunrise. And in fact, people did go to the tomb and find it empty on Easter sunrise. But this says in the end of the Sabbath, which is Saturday before 9, as it began to dawn towards the first day of the week. Well, what does dawn mean? Okay, the normal word for dawn is break of day. In the Bible, sometimes it's translated day spring. But dawn has a much broader meaning than that, with a dawn of a new age, a dawn of a new company. It means the beginning of something. And so it's a little bit difficult to just sit down and read this passage without studying through it to see what it might say. So in the American Standard Version, now I'm skipping the Revised Version and the Revised Standard. The Revised Version was in between 1769 and 1901, and the New Revised was 1947. So I'm skipping those two. But the American Standard Version says, late on the Sabbath day, as it began to dawn towards the first day of the week. The New American Standard, 1960, and this is where I was shocked because I've got this 1995 New American Standard, and when I got to Matthew 28:1, when I first got this thing many years ago, and I came to it and it says, after the Sabbath. I thought, whoa, nobody informed me that they were going to change that. But see, the translators have a problem because in their mind, they couldn't reconcile that it was late on the Sabbath day, late on Saturday. They couldn't reconcile that because of church tradition. And so some versions began to translate it after the Sabbath. And if you look at the old people that commented on it, John Gill and Matthew Henry, and they all say, well, this obviously means after the Sabbath, not late on the Sabbath. And they were able to get around it by mental gymnastics. Now, I say all this because it doesn't matter. That's not the important thing about this story. So we have New American Standard 1960, late on the Sabbath as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week. New American Standard 77 and 95, both. I don't have a 77, but they both translated after the Sabbath. The New King James, now after the Sabbath, as the first day of the week began to dawn, which is a nicer sentence. Matthew 28:1, New Revised Standard, after the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning. And the Young's literal translation, which is old, but it actually gets it the most correct of all of them. It says, on the eve of the Sabbath at the dawn towards the first Sabbaths. They didn't say, in those days, next week. They said next Sabbath. How far, you look at Daniel, for example, 70 weeks. A week is a Sabbath. So 7 Sabbaths is 70 years. 7 days is a week. And this is the actual literal translation. On the eve of the Sabbath, Saturday night, at the dawn, toward the first of the Sabbaths. So it says in the end, but as it changes over. Now, can you split a second? Of course you can. Can you split time between seconds? You can. You can split an atom. They didn't know that. Okay, well, here's gold, and it's an element, and here's uranium, it's an element, and I wonder what would happen if we split the atom. Where do we get the term in a split second? There comes a point where the days change, and we're not precise enough to know where the days change. If you ever worked on a movie on your computer and you want to start at a certain word, it's difficult to get that thing stopped in the right spot so you can split it right there, because it's in between seconds. And then you want to cut something out, something you said on Sunday morning that you don't want published out in the community. Actually, they get what they get. But when I sit down at home and make a teaching, I shouldn't have said that, or I might make a mistake that I want to change. And it's difficult to split that second. So we're talking about the change of days. You see, if Jesus was actually raised on the last second of Saturday, and the next second is Sunday, and what difference does it make? But it makes a difference on our theology, because we want to say that, okay, well, yeah, the Bible does say in the Old Testament that we're supposed to worship on Saturday, but Jesus rose on Sunday, and so therefore we've taken Sunday as our day. I mean, we'll rationalize it that way. Why does the church meet on Sunday? There's no biblical mandate whatsoever anywhere. The reason that the church meets on Sunday is because in the ancient Rome, the people worshiped the sun on Sunday, and that was their day to take off. And so the church tried to accommodate people, and the date was changed to Sunday. Or maybe in New Testament times, maybe the Jews used the synagogue on Sabbath day, and the Messianic Jews used the synagogue on Sunday. I mean, that in some cases, I think that was the case as well. I hear a phone. Okay, next slide, please. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, not Mary, the mother of Jesus. Mary was a common name in those days because it's the Greek rendering of the name Miriam, who was Moses' sister, famous Old Testament person, so a lot of people named their kid Mary. Suddenly, there was a great earthquake. Now, if you haven't experienced a great earthquake, you can't quite understand what's happening here, but I think you've had some earthquakes, haven't you, Julie? Is it frightening? As we get older, we have more experiences, and I was in the big Seattle earthquake back in 2000 and 3 or 4 or something like that. It was the biggest earthquake they'd had there in 50 years, and it was just amazing and scary. All the kids tried to jump under the desk. I said, "That's nuclear war. Get out the door." And everybody ran out the door. So there was a great earthquake, for the angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. Probably was tired. His appearance was like lightning. You ever been close to a lightning strike? Again, very scary. His clothing was white like snow, and for fear the guards shook and became like dead men. And the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid. I know that you're looking for Jesus who was crucified. He's not here. He's been raised. As he said, come see the place where he lay." That doesn't sound like good English to me, but I guess I'm probably wrong. "Then go quickly and tell his disciples he's been raised from the dead, and indeed, he's going ahead of you to Galilee, and you will see him. This is my message for you." Okay, well, that's what Easter is about. Let's look at this scripture. All the kings of the nations lie in glory, each in his own tomb. Well, move it ahead and you'll see. All the kings of the nations lie in his glory, each in his own tomb. Lenin was one of the nastiest, rottenest people who ever lived on the earth. Killed millions of people. And when he died, they stuffed him and they put him in a glass corner of a building in Moscow, and they left him there for everybody to come up and see his body. And I believe he's still there. They might have moved him out of there. Is he still there?
I think so. Years ago they talked about finally burying him.
But Vladimir Putin said no, because he was very important. We don't want people to forget what a nice communist that guy was. And so you probably can go there to Red Square in Moscow and you can see Vladimir Lenin's body. And when I was in Ukraine, there were statues to Lenin everywhere, because he is a great, great man. And there he is in his tomb.
In Kazakhstan, there's pedestals where the statues used to be.
There were most of them were taken down in Ukraine, but when I was in Zaporozhye, there was one that was still there, and there's a picture of it on my Facebook if you want to take a look. All the kings of the nations lie in glory, each in his own tomb. This is George Washington's grave at his homestead. The Congress decided when they were building the Capitol building, they built a crypt for Washington's body. And they talked his wife into letting him be buried there, but the Capitol wasn't done, and it said in George Washington's will that he should be buried on his home plantation, and so they buried him there at his home. And some vandals broke in and tried to steal his head, and so they built these gates around it to keep people out. So all the kings of the nations lie in glory, each in his own tomb. This is Lincoln's grave. All the kings of the nations lie in glory, each in his own tomb. I mean, look at the expense, and you probably can't even begin to imagine the height of that thing. It's like the Pennsylvania Monument at Gettysburg. If you've ever seen it, you see a picture of it, it looks like this, and when you get there and you're in the picture, you're about this high because the thing is so huge. Very important person. Got to build him a very important tomb. This is Ulysses S. Grant's tomb. All the kings of the nations lie in glory, each in his own tomb. Any of you remember the Groucho Marx show? Yeah, you're all too young for that. There was a consolation question at the end if you didn't win. And the question was, who's buried in Grant's tomb? And a significant amount of people got it wrong. This is in New York City. All the kings of the nations lie in glory, each in his own tomb. There we have John Fitzgerald Kennedy's tomb with the eternal flame that was lighted the day he was buried. I can remember it as if it was yesterday, seeing the procession and playing the dirge as the casket rolled down on the caisson to the burial in Arlington National Cemetery. And they lighted that little gas pipe there. And as long as there's gas to go there, that thing will burn, because this is President of the United States. Next one, please. All the kings of the nations lie in glory, each in his own tomb. This is Henry VIII tomb. Very unassuming. It's probably in the cathedral there in London. I'm not sure exactly where it is, but we see that Jane Seymour is buried there with him, and King Charles I is buried there with him. All the important people, they have beautiful tombs that are tourist attractions and people can go to. Next slide, please. All the kings of the nations lie in glory, each in his own tomb. This is King Tut. can you imagine making, is it called a sarcophagus? Is that what it is? Out of solid gold and putting your dead king in? You know how much that money is? You know, if they melted that thing down, it's probably pay off all the debt of Egypt. And they didn't find this thing. The tomb raiders didn't get to it. And it was found, I think, in the 20s or somewhere early in the 20th century. And they found this tomb and everything was still there, all the things that they put in there. And some of the things are being shown in the museums and so forth. And so we didn't know anything about Tut before this, but when we found his tomb, wow, what a king he must have been. Next slide. All the kings of the nations lie in glory, each in his own tomb. This is Julius Caesar's tomb. It has deteriorated over the millennia. But there it is, and people are still putting flowers on it, even to this day. All the kings of the nations lie in glory, each in his own tomb. Next slide. Napoleon Bonaparte. Look at this. How much did that cost? Important guy. Till he met his Waterloo, which became the word which we always use for any general that loses a major battle and loses the war. But they gave him the most magnificent tomb there. Next slide, please. This is a passage from Isaiah chapter 53, and I'll try to hurry. They made his grave with the wicked and his tomb with the rich. Although he had done no violence, there was no deceit in his mouth, yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him with pain. When you make his life an offering for sin, he shall see his offspring and shall prolong his days. Okay, he's going to die. This is 700 BC, by the way. He hasn't done anything wrong. He's going to die. He's going to be an offering for sin, yet he's going to live. His days will be prolonged, and the will of the Lord will prosper. Matthew 27:57. First century now. When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who was also a disciple of Jesus. And he went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. And Pilate ordered it to be given to him. So Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and he laid it in his own new tomb, which he had hewn in the rock. And then he rolled a great stone to the door of the tomb and went away. And Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were there, sitting opposite the tomb. So we have Mary and Mary at the burial as the tomb is closed. And we have Mary and Mary at the resurrection with the tomb open and the angel sitting on the tomb 3 days, or 3 nights and 3 days later. So it's hard to put a timeline in this, but we see the total devotion of these two Marys to Jesus. They were there probably every morning and every evening, and the fact that they were attending to the tomb of Jesus meant that they were in fact the ones who were the initial witnesses of the resurrection. The disciples weren't there. They were probably scared to the nth degree. But the women, they were there the whole time they were available. Now, skipping to Acts chapter 2, verse 25 in the next slide. This is Peter on the day of Pentecost preaching. He says, David says concerning him, concerning Messiah, I saw the Lord always before me, for he's at my right hand so that I will not be shaken. Now this is an allusion. Not an illusion in that it's a wrong thing. It's referring to Psalm 110, The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest according to the order of Melchizedek. So David says, King David says, 1,000 years BC, I saw the Lord always before me. He's at my right hand so that I will not be shaken. For you will not abandon my soul to Hades, or let your Holy One experience corruption. For you have made known to me the ways of life. You will make me full of gladness with your presence. So this is a quote from Psalm 16. Now, Peter speaks. Fellow Israelites, I may say to you confidently, our ancestor David, that he both died and was buried, and his tomb is with us to this day. And if you go to Israel, you can go to the place where David's tomb purportedly is. And there's there's a sarcophagus, and whether there's some doubt as to whether it's really where David was buried. But in the time of the New Testament, they knew where his grave was because all the kings lie in glory, each in his own grave. So he says, we know that this prophecy is spoken, and we know that it's not about David because he was buried and his tomb is here with us. But he was a prophet, and he knew that God had sworn with an oath to him he would put one of his descendants on the throne. Foreseeing this, David spoke of the resurrection of the Messiah, saying he was not abandoned to Hades, nor did his flesh experience corruption. This Jesus God raised up. All of us are witnesses. And those witnesses were willing to die rather than to deny it. And if you look at the history of what happened to them, none of them ended up too good because they were persecuted. So, therefore, next slide, as the Holy Spirit says, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. So, what time is it? Yeah. You totally missed the point. It's time today. It's time today to hear his voice and not be hard in our heart. We're out of time. May God bless you. See ya. Happy Easter.